Hey Optimancers, Chris here. In our last video I went over summoning options for the Conjure Animals spell, and in today's video I'm going to go over options for the Conjure Woodland Beings spell. If you like this kind of content and would be interested in supporting it, please find a link to my Patreon page in the video description. Patrons see these videos early and without YouTube ads. Additional perks depending on your level of support include an exclusive Discord community and joining me to play some D&D each month. Today I want to recognize these patrons: Adam D. Bell, Airhead, Alex Oquendo Vang, Alexander Baldwin, Alex R., Rob Reichelt, Awesome Face, Ben Potts, Benjamin, and Black. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. So I want to expand on something I said in my Conjure Animals video. I mentioned that there's nothing in the spell description that says the player picks what creature is summoned, and different DMs are going to run this in different ways. But I want to clarify what the designers have said about this topic. If we look at Sage advice on this, the column reads, "Some spells of this sort specify that the spellcaster chooses the creature conjured. For example, Find Familiar gives the caster a list of animals to choose from. Other spells of this sort let the spellcaster choose from among several broad options. For example, Conjure Minor Elementals offers 4 options. The design intent for options like these is that the spellcaster chooses one of them, and the DM decides what creatures appear that fit the chosen option. Conjure Woodland Beings is one of those latter kinds of spells that allows you to select from broad options. Let's take a look at the spell description. So this is a 4th level spell with a duration of up to 1 hour using your concentration. You summon fey creatures that appear in unoccupied spaces that you can see within range. Choose one of the following options for what appears: 1 fey creature of challenge rating 2 or lower, 2 fey creatures of challenge rating 1 or lower, 4 fey creatures of challenge rating 1/2 or lower, or 8 fey creatures of challenge rating 1/4 or lower. Summoned creature disappears when it drops to 0 hit points or when the spell ends. The summoned creatures are friendly to you and your companions. Roll initiative for the summoned creatures as a group, which have their own turns. They obey any verbal commands you issue to them, no action required by you, and if you don't issue any commands to them, they defend themselves from hostile creatures, but otherwise take no actions. The DM has the creature's statistics. We can also cast this spell using a higher level slot. We can get twice as many creatures with a 6th level slot, or 3 times as many with an 8th level slot. Now, if we look at Conjure Animals and Conjure Woodland Beings, we're going to see that you get the exact same number of creatures with the exact same challenge ratings. So the question would be, why would we want to cast a 4th level spell instead of a 3rd level spell if the challenge ratings and the number of creatures is the same? And the reason is because fey creatures just happen to be a lot more versatile than beasts. Now I mentioned with Conjure Animals, the issues with if the DM is just picking randomly, there's a fair bit of different kinds of sizes we could end up with, and that can really affect when it can be useful. With Conjure Woodland Beings, that is amplified dramatically. With a random selection, there's a really good chance you're going to end up with something really useless for the situation, far more than with Conjure Animals. However, if we're picking our selections, there's a lot more we can do with Conjure Woodland Beings than with Conjure Animals. As we know, officially speaking, the DM chooses the creature. Though, as I mentioned last time, just because the DM officially chooses the creature doesn't mean that's what your DM does. There's 2 common table rules I've come across. The first is the player makes a suggestion of what creature they would like. If the DM thinks that decision is appropriate, then that's what you get. Or, and this one I've come across from 2 different DMs very recently, pick whatever you want except pixies. Why not pixies? We'll get to that. I want to repeat the 3 questions you should ask your DM before taking this spell, and ideally before you consider whether to play a summoner in the first place. The first question is, how is it determined what creatures show up? We just talked about what the official ruling on that is. If your DM doesn't know the official ruling, by all means share it with them, but that doesn't mean they're just choosing randomly. The second thing you need to ask is, when do the creatures take their turn? Again, officially, they're rolling their own initiative and then taking their turns in order as a group. But this again will change from table to table. And finally, if the answer to the question 1 was we can either suggest an option or just choose one, which sources are we allowed to choose from? Now, in the Conjure Animals video, I cautioned against allowing any source because there's some pretty weird options in there. I don't think you have quite the same problem with Conjure Woodland beings. I mean, there's some good options in some of the less common source material, but I don't think necessarily broken options. But my advice on Conjure Woodland beings is if the answer to the first question is that you as a player have no control at all over what shows up, then taking Conjure Woodland beings, honestly, it's pretty iffy. And there's just such a dramatic variance here in what might show up. In Conjure Animals, it's a little different because no matter what you get, they can probably hit hard. But that's not the case with Conjure Woodland beings. But if you do get to choose, or even suggest, which creatures show up, then this spell has a lot more versatility than a spell like Conjure Animals. So even more than that spell, I think going through the options in a video is going to be valuable. Now, I'll be looking at a number of different source books here, so make sure you clear those with your DM before you count on any of these being available. What I'm going to do here is, instead of going by challenge rating, I'm going to list my favorite 11 options in order, last to best. Though I like all these options, because each one does bring something unique to the table. Before we get to the top 11, let's go over the one that no DM with any experience is ever going to allow, the Pixie. There's a very obvious reason this option isn't going to be allowed or provided at the average table. So you get 8 of these when you cast a spell. That means 8 polymorph spells, 8 fly spells, 8 phantasmal force spells, 8 entangle spells, 8 dispel magic spells, 8 confusion spells. That's 136 spell levels of solid spells for one 4th level slot. So that's crazy, and your DM shouldn't let you anywhere near these, unless your DM is inexperienced, in which case you're still going to feel dirty afterwards if you take advantage of them like this. So I'm not including this in my top 11. Obviously it's the most powerful pick, but it's not my favorite because it's never going to come up. So that out of the way, here are my top choices that might be allowed at your table. At number 11 is the Satyr. It's from the Monster Manual, so it should be an option at pretty much any table, and at challenge rating 1/2, you get 4 of them. So why would you summon Satyrs? Well, at 31 hit points each, and if you're a Shepherd Druid, that's 45 hit points. That's a big hit point pool, and by far the biggest we're going to see on this list, and comparable to what we get with Conjure Animals. We can also use these as a ranged attack platform with their short bows. Unfortunately, we're only talking 14 damage per round altogether. Though frankly, I would send them into melee with their short swords. The best use of Satyrs is to do a bit of damage, take up some spaces, and hopefully draw those enemy attacks. So if you want a big sack of hit points, get yourself 4 Satyrs. Next up is number 10, the Darkling Elder from Volos. These are challenge rating 2, so if you summon this, you just get 1. You don't have the darkness spell prepared? Well, actually, yes you do, because you have Conjure Woodland beings prepared. Summon the Darkling Elder and they cast darkness. Technically, you can get about 11 points of damage from them per round after darkness is cast, though you are putting that darkness spell in jeopardy if you do. Now, is darkness worth a 4th level spell slot? Well, in my opinion, if you need it and you don't otherwise have it, then yes, but not to the point where I'd put this anywhere near the top of the list. That brings us to number 9, the Nereid. This is from the Tales of the Yawning Portal. This is probably our top choice for encounters in the water. Like the Darkling Elder, this is CR2, so you only get 1 when you summon it. Now, we could expand a preparation slot on Control Water, and maybe we need it, and maybe we don't. Or we could spend that preparation slot on Conjure Woodland beings, and we have that Control Water spell when we need it for a spell slot of the same level. Speaking of dealing with water, 60-foot swim speed, invisibility as a bonus action without concentration, a water lash that does okay damage and can push enemies or knock them prone, or a ranged attack that automatically blinds them for a round on a hit. And it's not too fragile either, 44 hit points or 60 if you're a Shepherd Druid. So this is a pretty specialized summon, but if you get into trouble in the water, this is a good choice. Now we're up to number 8 on my list. Straight out of the monster manual is the Sprite, and with a challenge rating of 1/4, you get 8 of them. So +8 stealth, invisibility at will, and the arrows require a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or the target is poisoned. If they get a 5 or lower, they fall unconscious. So if the creature is immune to poison or has a saving throw modifier of 9 or more, then these are pretty useless in combat. Otherwise, it's all about the poison. So these are pretty useful in some combats, pretty useless in a lot of other combats. Technically, you could also use them as invisible scouts or to detect alignments. Next up is number 7, the Brigganocks from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight Adventure Path. This is only challenge rating 1/8, so you can summon 8 of these. So if you're just looking to do damage, these pull in around 17 damage per round total, and only have a measly 9 hit points each. They are tiny, so space is no problem. But the interesting thing is the other things the Brigganocks can do. It can tunnel through solid rock at 5 feet per round, leaving a 6-inch wide tunnel. They also have a special feature where they can do an hour of work in a matter of seconds once per rest. So 8 tunnelers doing 1 hour of this tunneling in a few seconds, I mean, that's like a pass wall spell. Now in combat, instead of sending them into melee, you should have them cast Fairy Fire. DC of 11 is pretty low, but, hit a group of creatures with 8 Fairy Fires, well then they have to make 8 DC 11 dexterity saving throws in a row. I mean, good luck. Other spells of interest on their list include Minor Illusion, Spare the Dying, and Silence. I mean, for a 1/8 challenge rating creature, pretty strong. So now we're up to number 6 on my list, the Reflection, which is a challenge rating 1/2, so you should get 4 of them. Now, Reflections, they're kind of from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but really they're an effect that can happen in a mirror zone rather than a standard monster stat block, so your DM has every right to restrict these based on the context of their appearance in the rules. That said, if they're allowed, Reflections are basically shadows, except they're fey and they're vulnerable to bludgeoning damage instead of radiant. Why would we want these? Well, because shadows drain strength on a hit. So they're doing about 18 points of damage per round, that's not terrible, and draining 3 or 4 points of strength on average per round on top of that. Then these can hide as a bonus action if they're in dim light or darkness. So if they're allowed, these are a pretty decent combat option. Now we're into the top 5, and we're getting some really nice options here. At 5th is the Might. Okay, so source books. The Might is from Mordenkainen's Fiendish Folio Volume 1. That technically was an official Wizards of the Coast release. It was like a charity release. So maybe these are allowed, but I wouldn't necessarily count on it. Definitely find out from your DM before you try to summon these. The Might is challenge 1/4, and it is just nasty. There's 2 things which make it a worthy summon. The first is any non-fey creature within 30 feet of it that can see it has disadvantage on dexterity checks and saving throws. And this has friendly fire, so move these away from your party, or have them maybe hide with their +6 stealth scores. The big thing though is it has a blood-boiling hex. This has no saving throw. The Might can do this from hidden without revealing its hiding place, and then the creature targeted takes a D6 penalty to all ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls. I mean, that's kind of crazy. The creature can ignore the effects for 1 turn by using their reaction to attack an ally. So, I mean, go ahead. This one is just awful. It's kind of like the Bane spell upcast to 6th level with no saving throw and a D6 instead of a D4. The only downside here is they can only do that once. So once they use it, then they're basically expended. You might as well give up concentration at that point. Let's look at number 4. The Alseids is from Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and we get 2 of these, and they each have the Plant Growth spell. Now, Plant Growth is a very strong spell, but you need the right kind of terrain to use it at all. But in any terrain, well, as a druid, sometimes you're called upon to be the healer. And instead of preparing and casting a bunch of healing spells, you could consider just preparing and casting Conjure Woodland Beings instead. We're talking about a total of 8 Cure Light Wounds for a D8 +4 each. That's about 51 points of healing and about 17 hit points per round. Also, 2 lesser restorations and 2 calm motion spells, which between them can deal with blinded, deafened, paralyzed, poisoned, charmed, or frightened PCs. So this becomes a pretty strong restorative option and frees up a lot of circumstantial preparation slots. And now we're into my top 3. We go back to Mythic Odysseys of Theros one more time with the Naiad, I'm going to say, challenge rating 2, so we only get one of these. They have a spell DC of 14, and they have Minor Illusion, 3 Phantasmal Force spells, Fly, and Hypnotic Pattern. So basically, you want to have them do their thing, then get behind full cover so they don't get killed. Now, as a druid, you probably don't have Phantasmal Force, Fly, or Hypnotic Pattern. But now you do. The DC isn't fantastic, but 14 isn't bad. And of course, if we cast Fly, we don't care about the DC. So just some nice spell options here. Single creature, but well worth it when you need these spells. Then we come to number 2. Conjure Woodland Beings is, generally speaking, not a great summoning spell when it comes to just delivering damage. But then there's the Quickling from Volo's Guide to Everything, which is probably our best option for that. Something to be careful about though, if you are a Shepherd Druid, just be aware that your summon phase natural attacks are treated as magical, but Quicklings aren't using natural attacks, they're using daggers, so they won't be. But 2 Quicklings is a solid 34 damage per round on average, assuming no resistance or immunity. And defensively, Quicklings, despite a low number of hit points, aren't easy to take out. They have a +6 dexterity saving throw with evasion, so area of effect damage is not going to be very reliable against them. And they're tiny, so they can fit anywhere. That movement speed, it's 120, so they can basically go wherever they want. And attacks against the Quicklings have disadvantage on top of a 16 armor class. So we got decent damage, amazing mobility, tiny size, and they are hard to hit. That's a nice combination. Now, if you are planning on using Quicklings, watch for magical daggers during gameplay. If you get 2 daggers, then you can cast this outside of combat, hand them their daggers, and then when you end up in combat, they have magical attacks. Then my favorite option for Conjure Woodland Beings, the Dryad. Straight out of the Monster Manual, the Dryad remains one of the best summons for this spell, and it's probably okay at pretty much any table. Also, if you're only using the Monster Manual, then it's just a case of summoning 2 CR1 creatures, and even if the DM is choosing, this should be what you get. Okay, so we have a total of 6 Entangle spells, 6 Goodberry spells, that's 60 points of healing right there, and 2 Pass Without Trace spells. This is with 1 4th level slot. So basically, if you don't want to expand a preparation slot for Pass Without Trace, you can summon 2 Dryads, get the Pass Without Trace, then you get 60 points of healing and 2 Entangles for combats. Now, I would not send them into melee with their shillelaghs. They won't survive or do much damage. They're probably best off just throwing those Entangle spells, though they do have a Charm option as well. So those are my top Conjure Woodland Beings options. This spell is not as straightforward as Conjure Animals. Conjure Animals is a damage dealing or a grapple and restraining spell primarily. But with Conjure Woodland Beings, you can trim down your spell preparations because so many spell effects can be accessed with this one spell, making it just wonderfully versatile. But if you need a combat option, well, you got the Satyrs for durability, or you've got Strength Drain of the Reflections, or Quicklings for that mad movement, damage, and armor class. So you do have options there. Hope that's helpful. And until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.